Okay, we're about ready to get started with the 2022 Gilt Show. Your judge this afternoon is Lindsay Poland from Walton, Indiana. She's a 10-year Indiana 4-H member, studied at Butler Community College and Purdue University, where she was on the livestock judging team at both schools. She currently works at her family's swine farm and boar stud, Schaefer's Gold Rush, and owns an all-Duroc sow herd with her husband and 2 sons.
What a phenomenal way to start off the show today. Let's give all 6 of these Berkshire exhibitors a big round of applause. I think it narrows down between 2 really high-quality gilts that are completely opposite in their type and kind, and so if you're standing ringside and you like it a different way, I'm personally not going to argue with you. I'm the type of judge that realizes that everything's not cut and dry, and if you like the one that I'm going to end up putting in reserve for champion, all I expect you to do is to go tell that young individual and lift them up and encourage them. I think for me, when they first came out, I thought that there was one that kind of had that feminine and mature look, but then as the drive went on and the young man's gilt right here started to actually calm down and get a drive, we see a lot of valuable pieces in that one. I know maybe she's not as feminine in her type, but this is the one that I think can maybe move the breed forward the quickest and fastest, and for that, she's going to be our champion Berkshire gilt. This is a gilt that's bold in her forearm, bold in the top portion of her back, down into her rib, and then you get right behind her. She sits down on the biggest bone, the fattest hind leg, that's still super square and wide at her hock. Just from the ground up, this one gives me more width, lower, and higher. If you say, she's a tick moderate in her package, and I'm not going to argue with you. That's definitely where the young lady's gilt holds the true advantage. She's the taller shouldered, longer bodied, longer hipped gilt that definitely has that more Faroese type and kind to her. But when you get right on top of her, she's maybe a tick higher in her chine, not as pulled apart in that front forerib. And then when you get down at the ground, she's maybe just not as pulled apart as the gilt that beats her. That's an awfully, awfully good gilt. That's the breeding type that's going to lay down, have pigs, unassisted, definitely a maternal type of female that you want sitting in your barn. 2 high-quality gilts that we have sitting there in 1 and 2. You know, the young man's gilt here in 3rd, if you look over the pin, she is the biggest backed, biggest ribbed, biggest hipped gilt of the class. Unfortunately, structurally, she doesn't match that. That front blade and shoulder is a little straighter and more upright. She's a little tighter and wants to set that hock in a little closed in behind her. I think if this one gets out and goes more structurally correct, you can use this one to win because she is the back, belly, body, and all that it takes to win. Just need to fix those feet and legs. The gilt that we have here coming out next, for as tall-shouldered and long-bodied as she is, I just need to see her more filled out. Like to see a little more center body and rib to her comparatively. And the same thing with the 2 that we have coming out next. These 2 are very similar in their type and kind. I just want to see a little more grow, a little more bone, a little more oomph and volume. I love the front end extension of the young lady's gilt that we have coming out right there. Definitely very feminine in her vulva set and kind. And same thing with the young lady's gilt that's going to round out the class. That's a really fresh, extended, really lean-made gilt. Just want to see her with a little more rib and body. Job well done. Very tough top pair. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Your champion Berkshire, exhibited by Abram Spear. Reserve champion Kenzie Rolls. 3rd to Bryce Eckstein. 4th to Sophie Volts. 5th to Kylie Weber, and 6th to Leanne Ludwig.
What a great way to start off the Duroc breed here with the young man in the red plaid. I think this Gilt wins this class pretty handedly. Yes, give them all a round of applause. She just has that show look about her. You get off to the side, and not only is she really neat and attractive through her head and neck and that jawline, but you get back to her behind her blade, and she's big-backed and stout-ribbed and drops down into a full belly and flank. And then you study her at the ground. She's dense in her bone work. She's wide in her lower skeleton. I'm not going to lie. I wish she was better in terms of structure. I would like to see her handle that hind leg with a little more stability. I would like to see that front shoulder a tick more relaxed. But when you just analyze pieces for pieces, this one puts the most positives together and checks the most boxes for me and is presented very, very well. You know, I really like the young man's Gilt here in second. Again, a practical breeding type of a female, one that's bold in her center body and pliable in that center rib and plenty of bone work. For me as well, she's maybe not as great hinging out of that back right hind leg. Like to see that one just go and give a little more. And then she's starting to get a little high in that chine bone, maybe not as dense in that bone work at the ground compared to our class winner, but another one that you just like from a true broodiness standpoint. You know, the decision for me is to be made between third and fourth here is that they both have advantages and disadvantages. I like the young man's Gilt here from the presence and look from the profile. When she gets off to this side, she's level from blade to hip. She's fresh and expressive in her muscle pattern, and she has a ton of foot and bone at the ground. For me, I think she just needs to soften up. I think if this one has another 50 days or so on feed, maybe even another 30 days where she can just tank out and grow up a little bit, she has all the right pieces. We just need to see a little more fill and body to her. And then the young lady's Gilt rounding out the class, albeit the most athletic hog that we've seen out here today, and made sure that the young lady got her steps in today. Another one I just like to see better structurally. She's a little straight off of both ends, maybe not as deep in her flank, but definitely a very athletic, very mobile Gilt. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Your first place exhibitor, Clark Dwanger. Second, Austin Rolls. Third, Noah Hilton Beidel. And fourth, Michaela Hilton Beidel.
I tend to spend a little more time on these Duroc Gilts because, again, this is where my bread and butter comes from at home. You know, I raise a all Duroc sow herd, and this is the breed that I spend most of my time looking at. And I think that the 2 young men's gilt that rise to the top of this class are awfully good. Each of them has an area that I want to tweak, and again, that's where the decision becomes just challenging, because each of them have a place that you'd like to fix, and each of them have places where they're going to help move the breed forward, and so there's a little bit of give and take. As I was sorting through them, I was thinking, you know, really, in all realistic, I could use either one and justify, but one just came out and hit me a little harder off the bat. Although I don't think she takes as long of a stride out of her hip as ideally I would like to see in my foundation females, this is the one that I think is the squarest and widest at her knee, the squarest in her back and in her upper hip. The young man in the red checker on the far side is going to have your class winner. And it's just those little things right there that I think hold her advantage. She's just fresher in her muscle pattern and her description, but yet she looks like a hog who's going to eat and who's going to grow. The hind leg structure is where I preferred the advantage over the young man here that's going to end up in second. She does take a little longer stride off of that, but you get on top of her and she's a little plainer and maybe a tick over conditioned in her top line, maybe just a little plainer as she works her way back to her ham-loin junction, and as well, just a little higher in her pole there, a little shorter in her neck. There are plenty of boars to breed this one too, to have a high power litter. That one's a very, very, very good gilt. I don't want to take anything away, young man. I really, really like her. When the young ladies gilt came out here in third, I thought, this is in front of her or behind her. There's just not enough there for me today. She's not bold enough in her rib. She's not wide enough at her base. But that beautiful profile look is what put her into third, because I just love her from the profile. The young lady's gilt here is going to round out the class. Even though she's in the bottom of the class, this is still great gilt. High quality gilt that has plenty of foot and bone, plenty of rib shape, really great in those maternal indicators. She's maybe, as she gets tracking, not as wide at the ground as she is up high. She's a little plainer in her head and neck. And then as well, you see she just got a little winded as I drove this drive a little too long. But job well done. Very nice class. Great top pair. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Abram Spear, your first place exhibitor. Carson Nobby in second, Evelyn McGuire in third, and Kinsey Rolls in fourth. Now we'll show for your champion Duroc gilt. Check, 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 test. Check, check. Check, check, test.
I think we get out here for the champion Duroc Gilt Drive, and for those of you that's just joining ringside, our considerations between the young man here, actually both young men in the red, and I have the seconds to come out because I wanted to compare, but I think there's one that just hits me a little harder. She came out of the tougher class. Young man from the second class is going to have your champion Duroc Gilt. And I think that's why I wanted to go ahead and drop the seconds out, because I knew the decision would be awfully close between them. You know, it's a decision between, do you like the pretty front end of the young man's class-winning gilt, or do you like the hind leg set of the young man's second place gilt there? And I think there's pros and cons to both of them. And, you know, the young man's gilt that was in second, I just want to reassemble kind of that front end look of her. And then the young man's gilt who won here, I also just want to relax her in that blade. So I think there's some pros and cons. For me, I'm going to go with the young man's hind leg. He'll follow up and be your reserve champion.
Abram Spear exhibits your champion Duroc gilt. Carson Nobby, your reserve champion.
Just a single entry out here for the young man in his Hampshire gilt. Let's give him a big round of applause. You know, I wish there was more competition, because this is a really good sound structured gilt who's level there from her blade to her hip. I know she wants to kind of put her head down, but you can read when that head comes up just the power pieces that she has. Great in terms of rib shape. Love that hind leg set. Let's give him one more big round of applause as he heads back to the barn.
Paul Fullenkamp exhibits your champion Hampshire gilt.
Let's give our two Hereford exhibitors a big round of applause. Quite honestly, this is a very challenging pair to sort through, because both of them have pros and cons, and we'll say that all day. If you like one that I don't choose to win, that is okay, as long as you tell that 4-H member that that's the one you would have selected, and encourage them to keep coming back year after year. I think there's a difference between size and bone, and then a difference between a fancy look and maybe genuine squareness. I think in this decision there's one that's that's just a tick better in terms of structure. Your young man right here is going to have your champion, her for gilt. I think it's her head and neck and the front end assembly that gives her the W, as she's taller there at her shoulder, ties better out of her neck into that shoulder blade, and then from there back is fresher up high, more genuine in her body pattern, and as well just a little more comfortable when she gets out on the move. The young lady was dropped out of the pen first, and I thought, man, that young man's gonna have to bring some heat, because this is a fast-growing, big-bodied, heavy structured gilt that has a lot of oomph and power. She's just a little more compact in that front end, a little shorter necked, a little tighter in that shoulder, and maybe not taking as long of a stride. And because of that, she's maybe getting a little more tired, a little more overheated, and just not allowing that presentation to be as attractive as the young man's. But that's a really great set of gilts. Let's give them one more round of applause.
Your first place exhibitor, Damon Spear, and your reserve champion, Hunter Meyer.
Just a single entry here in the Poland class, and this is a gilt. Quite honestly, we talked about femininity before and freshness, and she fits that bill. Her head and neck and jawline are so attractive, youthful and beautiful, and she's fresh and expressive over her back shape. If I were going to criticize her, I'd like to see her with a little more bone at the ground, but quite frankly, that's a very feminine, very beautiful, well-presented gilt. Let's give this young lady a big round of applause for her champion, Poland gilt.
Sophie Rolls exhibits your champion, Poland.
You know, in all reality, it doesn't take very long to analyze a hog and get a good read on him, and the young man's doing a great job with his champion spot gilt. She's one that's wide skulled and wide at her ear set, and that carries all the way back to her back shape and bold rib. You know, again, if I'm going to criticize this one, I'd like to see that hind leg set a little square when you get behind her. She wants to push in her hock, but that's a very well presented, really good stout gilt. Let's give the young man a big round of applause for his champion spot gilt.
Your champion spot gilt exhibited by Abram Spear, with assistance from Ryan Miller.
Well, hey guys, we only have one Tamworth entry, but an awfully dang good one. Let's give this young man a big round of applause. You know, the Tamworth breed, they're going to go one of two ways. They're either going to be big and extended and dry-ribbed, or they're going to be stout and bold and opened up, and that's exactly what this gilt is. She's soft and pliable through that center body. She's just has a lot of volume and oomph through that center 1/3, and she's thick in her skull. I'd maybe like to see her catch another gear. When we think about that champion drive later this evening, like to see her catch another gear and just really really get going. But she's packing a lot of punch. Young man's done a great job. One more big round of applause for him.
Damon Spear exhibits your champion, Tamworth.
Very interesting class of Yorkshire Gilts. Let's give all four of these young ladies a big round of applause. I want to be very open and honest. The class-winning Gilt does not have enough muscle for me. I know that. She does not have enough muscle. You can criticize her for that, and I will agree. However, she's what I call a big green Gilt. When you get her out and she starts walking across the ring, she's the soundest structured, heaviest structured, tallest shouldered, longest bodied, best balanced Gilt. So she has two advantages over the ones that are behind her, and the fact that she takes the longest stride and balances the best from the profile. I understand when you look down the top side of them, there's not enough there, but there's enough substance of bone at the ground, there's enough height and maternal look that I like her to win. You know, the gilt here in second, she does have the back shape that I want. She's wider over her blade. She's thicker and bolder down her top and stouter in her upper hip. But when you get off to the side of her, or when she comes at you, you see that she's really soft on those front pasterns. She wants to turn those front toes in. She's a little lower and maybe just a little junkier about that head and neck. If we can just reassemble that one's front end structure, that power that she has behind, that's where you can take that one and use her as a W. The young lady's gilt here in third. Another one, really incredible shape down her back and in her hip and square all the way down to her stifle. But again, it comes down to structure. She's a little straighter in that front shoulder, little higher in that chine bone. And again, I've said chine quite a bit today. That's that bone that's sticking up out of their neck in between their shoulder blade. And then right there, when you get right behind her, she just wants to push that hock just a little bit. I think that's a very nice gilt in terms of muscle, power, skeletal width. We just need it to go in a sounder package. And then the young lady who's going to round out the class, a very fresh, youthful, extended through her head and neck. It for me just needs a little more body, a little more volume to go with all of that extension. Job well done, very tough class. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Your first place exhibitor, Shaylin McGuire. Second, Cheyenne Franklin. Third, Marissa Eckstein. And fourth, McKenna Volts.
I think an incredible York gilt class. Let's give all four of them a big round of applause. You know, when one comes out and just hits you, you don't want to take too long, and that's the young man's Gilt right here in front of me. She's the widest in her chest floor, the squarest in her knee. I know she's maybe not wanting to get out here and drive as ideally as we would like, but man, as you just study her from the profile, not only does she look like a show Gilt, she looks like a sow. She's big backed and big boned and bold in that center body, wide through those pins, just a very nice, complete Gilt that checks all the boxes of what I'm looking for today. Really love the young man's Gilt that's here in second. I love her hip and hind leg structure and the way that she sets those down. I think for me, it's when she came right at me. She's not as opened up in that upper portion of her chest floor. She gets a little Yorkie footed and gets a little softer on those front pasterns and just maybe not as overall square and wide as the one that beats her. But I think from a feet and legs and a depth of body standpoint, I can really get behind that one. Young lady's Gilt that's going to end up in third, a very high quality Gilt. And when we talk about production traits, study that underline and her vulva set, her bone size, her depth of body, her length of rib. There's a lot of positive pieces to this one. For me, when you get off to the side, she gets a little plainer in her makeup. Maybe not as extended through her head and neck, maybe a tick steeper in that rump, and then just not as fresh up high. But that's an incredibly nice Gilt to sit in the third hole at a county fair. Same thing with the young lady's Gilt here in fourth. Quite honestly, sweetheart, she went fourth because she's a little hot and overheated. She came into the ring with her mouth open, and that concerned me just from a longevity standpoint because that's a wide-chested, big bone, big-backed Gilt that has a lot of pieces to her. She just maybe can't handle all that extra width and coverage, and so ultimately she ended up at the bottom of the class. Job well done. Really great set of pigs and showmen.
Damon Spear, your first place exhibitor. Chase Nobby second. Leanne McGuire third. And Sydney Rolls fourth. Now we'll show for your champion, Yorkshire Gilt.
Let's give all four of these exhibitors a big round of applause. Super fun Yorkshire Gilt drive, and I think there's no secret. There's one out here that just fits my bill. Young man's Gilt here from the last class is going to be your champion Yorkshire female. I think the decision then comes for reserve. And just to talk about the two, the young man's Gilt we said before that comes in second, I'd like to see her wider in that chest floor. I'd like to see her just a notch more opened up there. And then the young lady's Gilt that's wanting to fight the fence now. She is so attractive from the profile and so big-legged, but just not enough muscle and power. And so I think there's a little bit of give and take between the two, but I do think that there's one that packs just a little more punch. I'm going to follow up with the young man's second place Gilt to be your reserve champion.
Your champion, Yorkshire Gilt, exhibited by Damon Spear. Your reserve champion, Chase Nobby.
Let's give these exhibitors a big round of applause. Another very nice class, and again, there's some that just when you like them, you don't have to study them long, and that's the young man's gilt. She wins this class pretty easily. She's extended through that front end. She's expressive in her back shape. She has the silhouette and look of a show hog, yet good breeding gilt. I think that's an awfully nice gilt that I look forward to seeing later today. Young man's gilt that's here in second, she simply just gets out-horsed and out-powered by her class winner, but when that head comes up and she's so attractive and well balanced from the profile, I just like to see her a little bit thicker all the way through. But from the profile, I think that one puts a lot of positives together. Young lady's black gilt, this one is just a tick more thicker than the one above her, and she is bold in that center body. But for me, I'd like to just see that hind leg just a tick better as she gets out on the move. She gets a tick straighter from that hock to the ground, and then a little high in that top line. But once she slows down and gets going, you really got to appreciate that center body. Young man does a great job exhibiting the gilt that's going to be here in fourth. She's a thick-skulled, bold-bladed type of a gilt. She just needs to be more balanced from the profile, maybe pick a better time to urinate here. But young man did a great job. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Sterling Rolls, your first place exhibitor. Elijah Eckstein second. Zoe Meir third. And Henry Cummer in fourth.
What a great class at Crossbred Gilts. Let's give all our exhibitors a big round of applause. Think a very nice class and a great top pair to sort, and you know, I kind of had to take my mind whether I wanted to go balance or bulk, and I opted to go with the bulk. And the young lady's black gilt, she's just the wider chested, bolder made gilt who's thicker down her top, and when you get right behind her, she just sets those hind legs down square and more true at the ground, as well as having more punch and power and just overall width up high. For me, I'd like to see her her maybe just a little bit darker in her skin complexion, get a little bit of suntan on her, I think then we'd gravitate towards that one pretty quickly. Skin and Hair Award goes to the young man who's here in second, presents this gilt very, very well. From the profile, you do like her body and build and the way she angles out of her top into her lower rib, but then when you get right in front of her and behind her, she's just not as opened up in her lower skeleton. She needs to be a tick more pulled apart, but that's a very well presented gilt. Young man does a nice job. The young lady's gilt here in third. I think another one that you need to see better in terms of balance and build. She gets a little outside of herself in that hock, but I like her over the fourth place just as she has more body and center rib and a little more stoutness of skull. And the young lady's gilt rounded out the class. This is definitely a long-bodied, long-hipped gilt. Again, we just need to widen her up, give her a little more power, a little more bulk and width. Job well done, really great set. Let's give them one more round of applause.
Elaney McGuire, your first place exhibitor. Blake Belter, second. Gracie Sturgeon, third. And Callie Comer, fourth.
You know, fun class to sort from, and as a judge, these are the ones that fun because you have some options and some give and take, and I wanted to give the young man's gilt in second plenty of time so I could really study her because she's the type that I want to like, but there was one issue just in that front shoulder of where I wanted to change her, and that's where the young lady's gilt, I was also, if I were going to criticize her, I'd say, she's not tall enough shouldered, so I understand that that's why, you know, it was, do I go tall shouldered or do I go a little more relaxed relaxed in the blade, and I opted with the gilt that's a little more relaxed in her blade. For me, I know she's moderate in her type, but at the weight range that we're at, she kind of fits the bill. She fits the weight. She's the most opened up in her chest floor. Again, all the things we've talked about, just the ESTs of bulk, power, and mass. You know, the young man's gilt, she is a little more inside of herself in terms of body capacity, and she is the taller shouldered gilt who has the better silhouette, but yet she's a little straighter and more up on her toes in the front end, maybe not as wide and thick as that class winner. That's a very neat gilt. I wish she just wanted to calm down so we could really get a good study of her. The gilt here that we have coming out next, to me, would be better in a market class because she has so much raw power and muscle and thick hip and bone. For me, she's just too raw in her type. I'd like to soften her up in that center body, give her a little more rear flank. Young man does a great job getting that one shown so I can see her well. And then the young lady we have rounding out the class, I think this gilt has a productive type of look, one that's extended and tall at her shoulder. I'd just like to see more substance of bone and center body volume. Job well done to all those exhibitors. A really fun class.
Evelyn McGuire, your first place exhibitor. Parker Bauman second. Austin Rolls third, and Callie Comer fourth.
Incredibly fun class. Let's give all 5 of these exhibitors a big round of applause. You know, the young lady's Gilt coming out here just is so good in so many areas, and you study her from any angle, but my favorite's that 3/4 angle as she goes away, as she's just so thick and dense in that hind leg and square in her hawk shape, and from building there up, she's good in her stifle, she's good in her hip, and she's so opened up and bold in that center body, and she gets off to the side, and she can move and motor, and you study her coming at you, and I know you all see it. She's down on those front feet. Quite frankly, that's the least of my concerns. They say, you know, even my barn cat's flat-footed, and she gets around better than anybody. So that doesn't concern me one bit in terms of a form and function. That's a really, really nice gilt. Young man's gilt coming out next. Man, so many good pieces. But I think that's what it is. There's pieces to her, not the total package. From the profile, that's the tall-shouldered, clean-necked gilt. That is better on those front feet. She's stout in her bone work, but we just have a few things. Maybe she's a little rawer and tighter in that forerib down to her foreflank. I know maybe she's got a little bit of a sunburn that's not helping her overall appearance, but I think if we can get that one to eat and open up in that center rib, that's a tough gilt to get around. Young lady with the orange gilt here coming out in third. Another one, again, so many attractive pieces to her. She's tall-shouldered, long-bodied, long-hipped. I know she wanted to kind of fight the whip, and she got out here, and as well, when she did that, it made her a little stoved up in that front end. She got a little tighter in that front shoulder, maybe just didn't want to grab and reach from that front end, but when she calms down and gets her head up from the profile, you really got to like that one, just like to see her reassemble in that front shoulder. The young lady's gray gilt that's sitting there in the fourth, that's another one that's shown so well. Great skin and hair condition. I just need to see more rear flank and center body into her. She gets a little uncoordinated on those hind two, but from the profile, I appreciate that slick head and neck and that great length of body and length of stride. And then the young man we have rounding out the class, another very productive type, F1 female that's thick and stout in her skull, dense in her bone work. Just want to pretty her up from the profile, make her a notch taller shouldered, little leveler in her design. Job well done, great class. Let's give them all a big round of applause.
Sydney Rolls, your first place exhibitor. Abram Spears, second. Third, Adeline Caney. Fourth to Michaela Cobbler, and fifth to Henry Cummer.
Let's give all 4 of these exhibitors a big round of applause. Another really fun class and 2 gilts that I think surfaced to the top. The young man's gilt here just hits me like the show gilt. She's the one that's really cool and neat through her head and neck. Where she excels the class is when you get right on top of her and she's the most opened up at the back side of her blade, most genuine in her shape, drops down into a full open rib, and you get right behind her and she sets those hind wheels down square from hock to hock. That's a really nice gilt that checks all the boxes, puts all the positives together, and shown exceptionally well. The young lady's gilt here in second. I'm going to tell you, I think that gilt is as natural as she is. I think if this were an open show and she were going to go home and be bred, and maybe she is, I'm going to say she won't melt. That is a true, natural, genuine made female that's wide over her top, bold in her center rib, that's square and durable in her hind leg. For me, she's just not as fresh backed. For me, she just needs to be a tick more shapely coming out of the back side of her blade. It's just that little difference that sorted the pair. Very, very nice set of gilts. The young lady's gilt here, I know she's getting hot and she needs to go back into the wash rack and get some water on her belly and nose. That's a tall-shouldered, long-bodied, long level made type of a gilt. She's just a little too raw in her type. I'd like to soften her up in her muscle, just give her just a little more body condition and fill. Make sure who's ever in charge of that gilt, let's not pour water straight on her back, nose and belly first, get her cooled down. Young lady's gilt that's here in fourth, another very productive type of female that's growthy in her type, deep and full in that center body. Just like to balance her up and widen her up. Job well done. Let's give all these exhibitors a big round of applause.
Chase Nobby, your first place exhibitor. Sophie Rolls in second. Allison Buchanan in third. And Alina Hicks in fourth.
Let's give all four of these exhibitors a big round of applause. You know, unfortunately, the show world has deviated and kind of separated from the commercial and production world. In that, we see, like we do in this class, just a vast difference of type and kind. The young lady's Gilt just fits the show ring world a tick better. She is the big-backed, heavy-structured, heavy-boned, big-muscled Gilt of the class that's extended and balanced and neat. Is she as soft-ribbed and does she get out and move as well in that front shoulder as I'd like her to? No, she doesn't, but yet she puts the most positives together to win this class. Young ladies, blue-butted Gilt here. Again, when we talk about the practical production type, here's one that's deep-bodied, that's balanced, the one that's the most pulled apart and thick in the upper portion of her body, and that's the widest in her pin set. For me, in the show world, we just need to balance her up, get her a little cleaner through that head and neck, but young lady's done a nice job with that one. Big, growthy Gilt of the young man here in third. Definitely the largest outline, casts the biggest shadow, deepest bodied Gilt. I just like to see her thicker when I get on the top side of her, give her a little more bone and structure at the ground, but one that you really got to appreciate in that center 1/3. You know, if I'm tough on any, I'm tough on the Gilt here because I do think this is an attractive, feminine-made Gilt who's flat in terms of her bone work. But again, we just need to make her wider and bolder and fuller in that center body. A job well done. Let's give all of them a big round of applause.
Your first place exhibitor, Michaela Cobbler. Second, Caroline Toops. Third, Braden Jaron. And fourth, Caroline Toops. Or fourth, Chase Hicks, excuse me. Now a show for your champion crossbred Gilt.
What a great crossbred gilt drive. Let's give them all a big round of applause. I have a terrible poker face. You know what, too, it's down between. Between the young lady's blue gilt and the young man's belted gilt here. Those were the two that excited me most in class and that I was most looking forward to seeing out here. And I'm just going to describe and talk about each one of them and then pick your champion. So in no order, you know, the young lady's gilt, she just gets out here and she can move. I mean, she's sound structured. She's a quick ticker in her pace. She's so bold in her bone work and truly that three-quarter angle away where she's so thick in that stout hind leg. I mean, you got to have a good hind leg and bulk and mass to fill it up to go forward, and I think she has that. She is a little soft-footed. We talked about that in class. She's maybe not as tall-shouldered as her class winner, or as the other young man's gilt, and that's the difference between them. But man, even though she's down on those front feet, she still gets out and goes, and I just love watching that one track across the ring. Young man, we can set that gilt down. She's getting hot. The young man's belted gilt here. From the profile, that's the tall-shouldered gilt who just has that silhouette of, when you think about a backdrop picture, that's the gilt you want to stand behind because she's a beauty. She has that extra crispness down her top. She has that shape up high, and she's squaring that upper hip. She's bigger in her overall makeup and kind. For me, it's there on the move. Is she as relaxed in that front shoulder blade as I'd like her to be? That's the difference. Because she's a little straighter on that front shoulder, she's taller shouldered. Because she's a little flatter footed, she's softer, she's a little lower fronted. That's the difference. That's the comparative, and that's why they look the way they do. I think they are awfully, awfully two good gilts. For me, though, I do think there's one that is good enough in that front end, has a cool look. Young man's belted gilt, your champion crossbred.
Chase Nobby exhibits your champion crossbred.
You know, part of me wanted to run with that belted gilt because I thought this gilt sitting behind her in second was awfully good. She's so natural in her type and kind, and so many positive pieces to her. And there's a lot of positive pieces to the gilts that we still have out here, but I can't separate the two. I love the young lady's blue gilt. That's an awfully stinking good one to follow up for reserve.
Sydney Rolls exhibits your reserve champion crossbred.